I never thought a simple side trip would lead me into a whole new world. 12. Riker was in full in every way possible. The way he entered the room demanded everyone's attention. It was like he thickened the air in the room with his presence. It was powerful. Mary didn't realize that their brief side trip was to a human city. It enthralled her at how busy it was here in the bigger cities than back at home. They had entered a skyscraper building. Dark-tinted windows reflecting in the sunlight. People opening doors for them. It was unusual for someone like her. Mary's eyes zipped to Riker, who walked to her side. Her eyes looked over his attire and confusion flooded her. He told them he had a business meeting, but his jet black hair smoothed back and tied in an outlandish ponytail. With the medium-length taper fade cut and heavy stubble growing, he looked like a rocker. He wore a plain black tee, shirt and a dark flannel overshirt rolled up to his elbow. Slightly ripped black denim jeans looked like it's gone through a life cycle of its own. Rocker-studded bracelets and daring silver necklaces of every kind. He finished the look off with black combat boots and black sunglasses. Mary looked at the people around them and saw how different they were in styles. They dressed all business, like while Mary wore Riker's clothes, his cardamom and clove scent rolling off from her in a possessive blanket. Any living, breathing werewolf within a 20-yard radius would guarantee to smell them both. Yet even with the way they dressed, the people who worked there greeted them with respect and smiles. I should have brought some clothes, Mary murmured quietly to them both. He turned his head to look down her body easily and then met her eyes with his dark sunglasses. If you hadn't cried all night, we would have stopped by a local retail store nearby. Mary sighed, and her shoulders sagged. She tried to hide her tears all night, but it saddened her. She upset her brother. It was the last thing she wanted to do, because of their close relationship. She also found she misses her family already. This was something she has never done before. I'm sorry, she fussed. Never mind what you are wearing. These people won't say or look down on you if they value their job. Riker threatened. Suddenly, familiar people appeared at the entrance of the skyscraper building. Abraham grinned at them, with his hands stuffed in his jeans while the enforcers gave a friendly wave towards her. Let's go, Riker said finally. Together they walked up to Abraham. How are things inside? Riker asked as soon as he reached his brother. Well, seeing that you arrived an hour and 20 minutes late to the meeting, I could complete the last details of the charitable event this evening, he replied casually. Riker didn't mention the reason they were late. He remained silent and added to the suspense why they were late. A movement to Mary's right snatched her attention to her right. She looked up to see a tall brunette, human man walking towards them. His eyes were on Riker first before it slid to Mary. His eyes did a quick assessment of who she was. She could see the equations and hypotheses going off in his head like bulbs. Clothes, messy hair, swollen eyes, late for the meeting. Conclusion, his side chick for the time being. A booty call. But then his eyes miraculously slid back up to greet her, and his assessment halted. No, not a booty call. She was too plain. Instantly, she didn't know what hurt her more. Mary could read his thoughts like sentences in a book. He has every right to judge her upon appearance. It was a normal reaction after all, but she couldn't help but feel hurt from his evaluation. Good to see you, boss, Callum greeted before looking at Mary again. This is, to my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nelben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing enthusiasm. A friend of mine, Riker explained. Callum nodded his head before greeting Mary. Nice to meet you. My name is Callum. Nice to meet you too. My name is Mary. Mary slid her hand into his outstretched one with a smile on her face. Callum hesitated. He didn't expect her to smile at him. Stunned for a moment. His hand held hers a little longer than necessary. Then he blinked and turned to Riker, who wore an unreadable expression on his face. Oh, so, everything is set. Just appear at the river center at 6 and we are good. Callum said stiffly. Thank you. Callum, you see, we weren't expecting to be attending any event. The clothes we brought with us are not fit for these kinds of events. Abraham chuckled. That is no problem. I have a friend who owns a menswear shop. He will help if I make a call. K.L. answered. K.L. only said menswear. It relieved Mary to hear she wasn't going. Perhaps she can do some city touring. That sounds exciting. But her exploring thoughts came to a stop when Riker spoke up. What about evening gowns? Riker asked. Her head snapped from K.L. to Riker. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilbe. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I was thinking about exploring the city. That late at night. Abraham questioned and looked at her like she was crazy. She may not have been trained to fight like all of them, but she knows how to protect herself too. Yes, she has quite a few selections of evening gowns for Mary. K.L. nodded. I don't think. If you want to explore the city, we can do it tomorrow. Tonight. We must attend the event together. Riker didn't wait for her answer. He wrapped his fingers around her wrist and pulled her with him. Obviously. He was worried about her. She felt irritated, but what does this mean for her? Riker had announced to everyone that she was his friend. This means she needed to stop all thoughts about him. Text me the address, Riker ordered without looking back. Glancing behind her, Mary saw that K.L. had already taken out his phone and started typing. Abraham and the rest of the enforcers began conversing. Interested in who would go, Mary turned to Riker. Are they joining us? She questioned. Riker glanced behind them to look at his brother, enforcers. Yes, but those boys like to do their own thing when we hit the human cities. We'll see them tonight. Riker replied. What about you? Do you join them usually? She asked curiously. He opened the jeep door for her to get into the front passenger seat, putting his hands on the door in the top of the car. He bent his head down to look at her. I do. Then I promise your brother I'll take care of you. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nelben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. You'll be going to the event. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nelben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Relax. Have fun. You came out to explore the world, didn't you? He challenged with a raised eyebrow. Well, she stuttered and crossed her arms underneath her chest while settling into her seat already. Riker was right. This was her opportunity, and suddenly, going to a major event of the year didn't seem so bad after all. They didn't head straight to the shop right away. They stopped by a local small diner and had a quick bite before heading to the shop. Once they were there, though, the young woman associate didn't waste any time noticing Riker's rough appearance. Immediately smitten and attracted to the dangerous aura Riker extruded, she sauntered over and introduced herself. Mary couldn't blame her. Who wouldn't be attracted to such fine species? He was perfection in every way. Good afternoon. My name is Sarah. Are we looking for something today or just looking around? Sarah batted her eyelashes. Immediately, Mary found her fake nest to be repulsive. Flirting wasn't something that Mary was accustomed to. She never pushed too hard or cared too much for it. The male she selects as her mate should appreciate who she was as a person. Already bored with the lady associate, she scanned the small shop. It was a beautiful shop, decorated with white walls and marble floors to make the outfits that hang on the walls stand out for their customers. Beautiful glass chandeliers hung from the ceilings to provide more than adequate lighting for the shop. On one side was for men's wear, and on the other side was for women's wear. The shop owner filled the shop with glimmering shoes, beautiful dresses, expensive jewelries, and purses. Suddenly, Mary wanted to flee. This was all exquisite, but she had no money. She ran away from her family. Mary was homeless. Riker's gentle touch on her back jerked her back to reality. She looked back at him, unable to hide the frustration and anxiety that was eating up inside of her. His face was expressionless. If he knew it agitated her, he showed no sign of sympathy. Mary was thankful for that. She would have fled the scene and sobbed a few tears. The anxiety of leaving her home and everything she knew was still lingering in the back of her mind. This resulted from abiding by societal norms and doing what she thought would guarantee her a mate. Now that she has done something she never thought she would have, she was out of it at her comfort zone. And if Riker showed her an ounce of sympathy, she would cry like a baby. That was the last thing Mary wanted. With a deep inhale, Mary squared her shoulders and lifted her chin. "Would you like an associate to show you around?" Riker asked. Mary shook her head. She wasn't used to being catered to. She liked her independence, and besides, all she needed to do was search for a dress. How hard can that be? Riker nodded before dropping his hand back to his side. The lady associate was quick in pulling him away, leaving her all alone. Slowly, she walked around the lady section. Her fingers touched the many fabric materials. Some were soft as clouds and others were rough with sequin patterns. Some were more conservative while others were revealing. After looking over the selection, Mary reminded herself that this was her time to focus on herself. She could do whatever she wanted. She picked a few dresses and heels randomly before walking into the women's dressing room. Going through the number of dresses, she smiled at a few ridiculous ones and cringed at a few. Going through the number of dresses, it ended up taking a lot longer, especially when zipping the back part of the dresses. Her arms ached from all the reaching. When she was more than halfway done with trying her dresses, she pulled on one that took her breath away. It highlighted her body in ways she didn't think possible. Her body wasn't too big or too small. It wasn't too curvy, nor was it too box-like. She was in the middle, and putting on this dress stressed her waistline. It made her bottom look like a peach, round and perfect. It was too scandalous with the lengthy cut that cut up her mid-thigh, and the V neckline was low enough that if someone grabbed the hem and pulled them apart, it would expose her. Mary looked at herself in the mirror. Her brother would have her head. He was protective of her. Something like this would never have made it into her closet. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nelbel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. It wasn't Riker but Abraham who called. Startled to hear Abraham calling her name because she was told they were doing something else, she stumbled in responding to him. Yes, she turned and almost ripped the door off its hinge. Footsteps coming closer told her he was heading inside the women's dressing room. Awful bold of him. To be honest, she tried stepping outside of the dressing room to greet him, but ended up tripping over the hem of her dress in the 2.5 until she had on. Shit, she screamed, preparing for her fall. Thankfully, Abraham grabbed her just in time. His arms wrapped around her waist and hoisted her up in his arms. Breathing a sigh of relief, she looked up at him to thank him, found that they were close, that their nose almost touched. He blinked. She blinked. His lips parted. Her lips parted. An awkward silence ensued between them. Whoa there. But hasn't righted her yet. Sorry, she grumbled. I wasn't thinking. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nelbel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. He replied. Abraham was a handsome male, which was one of the many reasons she chose him. He wasn't an alpha, so he wasn't too far of a catch for her to reach. He didn't have a lot of women from her research, which was another reason she selected him yet. Being in his arms, she felt no sparks. She didn't feel her heart skip a beat. She didn't feel the butterflies fluttering in her stomach at feeling his close proximity. It wasn't like how she felt when she was in Riker's arms. Suddenly, she was yanked away from Abraham. Mary let out another yelp just as she landed hard upon a hard chest. The smell of cardamom and clove hitting her in waves. Her stomach fluttered with butterflies and her heart was doing sprints. Abraham, why don't you go find yourself a suit? Riker growled in annoyance. I thought you wanted me to check on Mary. Abraham interjected. That was before I saw you had your claws around her. Get out. He snarled angrily at his brother. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nelbel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nelbel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Phew, I swear your mood is giving me whiplashes. We need to hurry and get home. I need normalcy in my life, Abraham said dramatically before walking out of the dressing room. By this time, Mary had already righted herself in Riker's arms, but he refused to drop his arms from around her. Once Abraham's retreating footsteps were out of earshot, Riker turned to look at her. The dark look on his face should frighten her, but she was turned on by it. Dropping her gaze, she looked at her feet and picked at her evening gown. That didn't stop her from feeling his gaze sweep over her body. "Do you like my brother?" Riker questioned. "What?" Her head snapped up at the top of her head slammed against his chin. She heard him grunt in pain and she cowered away with her hands on top of her head. "Crap. I'm sorry," she quickly said, and to touch his wrist and pull them back, so she can see the damage she has done. There was no bruise, but she cut his lip. Riker's tongue darted out to lick the blood on his lip. He touched it gingerly with one of his thumbs, his eyes slowly on her. I don't like him," but wondered if she should tell him she had wanted Abraham to be her mate. He scrutinized her face for a good minute before he nodded his head, his eyes now trailing over her body again. "But it's none of your business if I do," she added, his hazel eyes dark and to a fierce brown. All tints of green or blue hue in his eyes disappeared, slightly mesmerized at how his eyes changed color. She spoke without thinking. "He's nice and kind. I assume a wonderful male to mate with," she admitted. Those eyes narrowed almost into slits. Without saying a word to her, he spun and walked out of the dressing room, leaving her speechless and confused. Mary couldn't even explain the constant nervousness that was brewing inside of her. Her mind was running a million clumsy. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Milburn, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm," and humiliating situations that could happen at the event. She was completely out of her element yet. Underneath all that, it enlivened her with the alternative possibilities in her life. For the first time, she was free to make her choice. There was no worrying about her pack or what they would think of her. It gave some courage that she needed badly. The evening gown she had chosen was beyond her imagination. All her old ball gowns were neither revealing nor conservative. She wore enough to show skin, but not enough to allow males to run wild. Tonight, she had chosen a gown with her eyes closed. Mary didn't care if she looked good in it, or if he looked horrible. Her hands ran gently down the white tall-sheer, lace evening gown, the pattern teasing her palms and rejuvenating the excitement inside of her. She was alone. Riker left with his enforcers, but he reluctantly allowed Abraham to bring her to the event. They drove in a rented limousine. Abraham was quiet next to her, and she was thankful for that. Her mind scattered and there was so much going on inside of her she knew she wouldn't be able to speak straight. Honking outside on the city street tore her eyes away from her lap. She looked outside onto the busy street. Back at home, it wasn't this busy. There were still so many cars outside, so many people walking and enjoying the evening. When the limousine slowed down, she turned to look towards Abraham's window. They were here. People were getting out of their limos or waiting to get out. Their limousine bypassed everyone's and drove straight to the front. Abraham opened his door before stepping around to open her door. She slid out of the limo with her hands in Abraham's offered hand. The night breeze brushed her shoulder and neck like a pair of lips. She sucked in a breath and her hands shook. "You okay?" Abraham asked when he felt her hand tightened in his. Her hair swept into a tight bun and lined with silver pins. Her makeup was light to match her light brown hair and fair skin. The street light gliss and the lip gloss on her lips. "I'm okay. Just nervous," she chuckled. He smiled down at her and she felt touched at his kindness. Abraham didn't tease her as she expected. It was a relief. Their limo drove away as soon as Abraham closed the door. He led her to the sidewalk before they took the wide steps to the grand entrance. Many people hung around to have conversation outside the grand entrance. Laughter and soft music tiptoed out of the building. "I remember my first time coming to these things," Abraham said as they climbed the steps. I looked about ready to shift and knock everyone over. The image of Abraham shifting in front of a bunch of humans seemed ridiculous, but it brought a smile to Mary's face. "You don't believe me?" Abraham questioned as they reached the grand entrance. "How can I? I've heard stories about you two brothers. You two fought to the top of our chain, made a name for yourselves, became the most successful pack out there, both in military combat and wealth." Mary replied, "I can think of every description that can describe both your ambitions and confidence, but anxiety, it never came to my mind." Abraham laughed loudly. It earned them looks from people who were nearby. Females looked at Abraham with evident interest. It only made sense. He looked both dashing and dangerous in front of everyone. The males that attended this event couldn't compare to his looks. "Mary," Riker's voice came from her right. She looked away from Abraham and found Riker standing in the main lobby waiting for her. Both their eyes did a slow assessment of their attire. Her skin riddled with goosens with each sweep of his eyes. Mr. Bad Boy transformed into something different. Hair swept back cleanly in a black tuxedo tailored impeccably to fit his body. He looked nothing like this morning. Secretly, Mary was glad when she noticed he kept the stubble growing on his jawline. It made him still look roguishly sexy, even when he dressed to impress. Her eyes stopped at his lips. Memories of their first encounter hit her in waves, and she felt the heat crawl up her cheeks instantly. Riker started walking towards her. When he reached their side, he opened his palm in front of her. Mary's eyes dropped to his hand before she slowly slid hers into his. Its warmth provided comfort that she didn't realize she needed. On instinct, she moved closer to him. Somewhere along the line, she has begun to trust Riker. It confused her so much that she didn't protest when she felt Riker put an arm around her waist and guide her further into the building. They walked past grand doors and into a very large ballroom. Instantly, she noticed how luxurious everyone looked. They looked like they bought clothes from the most high-end fashion designers. It was almost daunting to stand in these people's presence until she felt Riker's finger pressed into her waist. "Raise your chin, Mary," he whispered gently to her. "You look bourgeois tonight. Everyone is looking at you with desire and envy." Mary found it hard to believe. He would look at her. She has gone to many ballrooms with hundreds of males were present. No one glanced her way. Even so, her eyes swept the lively room and found that they were the center of everyone's attention. Riker stopped and turned her body slightly to face him. With one hand under her chin, he lifted her chin higher to look at him. His thumb swept across her chin and touched her lips. "I believe they are looking at you, not me. Alpha Riker. Call me Riker. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." Mary realized her mistake. They were in a room filled with hundreds of humans. They would think they were crazy if she had used his title. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm," she whispered. His eyes darkened passionately that her insides twisted in response. But then he blinked and that look disappeared. Mary almost thought she was hallucinating. But the imprints of his hand on her waist said otherwise. For the first time, Mary lifted her chin, and she continued to do so throughout that evening. They talked to hundreds of people. She couldn't even remember everyone's name. Everything was a blur. Soon it became too hot. There were too many bodies and everyone was fighting for a chance to speak to Riker. She needed to step away. Mary placed a hand on Riker's hand was on her waist. Not once did he let her go throughout the evening. He kept her by his side. Many people asked about her. Males looked at her with clear interest, but she smelt something on them, something that revolted her. They reeked of sexual hormones that she knew Riker would for sure notice too. Each time a male approached her, he would move her closer to his side. "I need to step away," she whispered close to his ears. He heard her even without looking at her, cutting his conversation with a businessman. He turned his attention back to Mary. They walked away from the ballroom. Abraham and the enforcers not too far from them. They talked and held conversations. but everyone's trained their eyes on Riker and Mary. Riker led Mary out into the main lobby and to the grand entrance. Once they were outside, the fresh breeze blew against her perspiring skin. She sighed in relief, basking in the breeze, and not paying attention at all to where Riker was leading them. When she paid attention, they were far from everyone. Hidden underneath a large tree with the moon was their company. Riker's hand dropped from her waist for the first time that evening. She moved and leaned against the tree. Lifting her chin, she closed her eyes while fanning her neck. "How are you?" he asked nearby. Without opening her eyes, she laughed. "I don't know how you guys do it. It's crazy in there. So many people," she replied. "My first time everyone had to stay at least 6 feet away from me. My enforcers had to build a wall around me," Riker said. Her eyes popped open, and she regarded him with a tilt of her head. "So, this is normal then," she said with a lopsided grin. He smirked back. "Definitely normal. Socializing has never been an issue for us. It's the greed and hungry vibes that reek from these people that affect our instincts. They wire us to not trust and to fight back." Riker moved to stand in front of her. What he said made sense to her because she felt that way around these people. "How long have you been doing this?" Mary questioned. 6 years. My first years. I was a nobody to everyone in there. And then you became rich. And then I became rich and people noticed me. That's not what I noticed when I first met you," she blurted, knowing she must sound like an idiot because why would he believe her? Riker raised an eyebrow. She replied, "When she was searching for a male to kiss that night, she had noticed Riker. The only reason she didn't choose him was that he was an alpha. He was way out of her league. Someone like her could never snag herself an alpha. More than likely she'll shame herself in front of him. But oh, she noticed him. She was extremely attracted to him, even more so than she was with Abraham that night at the mating ball. But her rational mind told her that Abraham was the right choice. There was something about Riker that pulled her in. Those hazel eyes were her weakness. They bore pain and heartache, loneliness, something she knew so well. Pushing off the tree, they stood mere inches from each other. That night, she kissed the wrong guy. But tonight, she would not make the same mistake. Call it a leap of faith. She cradled one side of his jaw and brought his lips to hers. He didn't fight her. Just like that night, he didn't respond. He waited for her to kiss him. Gently, she sucked on his bottom lip. Her hand was on his jaw, slid to the back of his head, deepening the kiss. Mary thrust her tongue in unskillfully at first, until she felt his hands on her hips. Then she slid her tongue against his. Instantly, he growled and pinned her up against the wall. He kissed her hungrily as if he wanted to this entire evening but was holding it all back until now. It drove her insane. Her heart and stomach fluttered in maddening beat. Just like that, Mary knew that she was in big trouble. She went out to snag the bait but ended up kissing his brother. Now her heart was in jeopardy of falling for someone she knew may break her heart in the end. Kissing her back was the best idea ever or the worst one ever. Riker couldn't get over it, and he was hating himself for it. The rules he followed were strict and simple. He vowed to develop no feelings toward females. He turned his focus on his pack. Females, they were just there for satisfaction. There should be no string attached. No emotional attachment. Why was it so damn hard for him to do that around Mary? Even after the event, he was still thinking about it, lying awake in the hotel bed, wondering what the female who was sleeping in the next room was thinking. Was she also lying awake like him, thinking about the kiss? To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. She wasn't what he expected. Hell, he didn't even register that she had kissed him until she kissed him. A smile crept onto Riker's face. He rolled over to his side and tucked his hands underneath his pillow. Staring out the window, he imagined Mary's face from earlier that night when he pulled back from kissing her underneath the moon. The lust that filled those round eyes. Mary was different, older than what society would deem mate, able age. But she was Navi and Riker was falling for those raw emotions that she seemed to display without a thought. It wasn't just her naivety that he liked. He liked how mature she was, how she jumped at the chance for freedom, how she had more courage than others to do what she wants and not care about society rules. Females rarely travel out of pack unless they are mating with other packs. They are courted by males. It wasn't out of the norm to see a young, beautiful female with a line of males wanting to be her mate. Sighing, he rolled onto his back and tucked his hands underneath his head. He closed his eyes and forced himself to sleep. Hours later, he woke up to the sun glowing through the open window of his hotel room. The white cotton comforter rolled down to his waist. Yawning, he stretched his body and got out of bed. Glancing at the alarm clock on the nightstand, he saw that it was a little after 8 in the morning. He quickly showered, brushed his teeth, and did a quick, careless comb through his hair before walking out of the bathroom and searching through his duffel bag for clothes to wear. He pulled on a pair of classic dark denim blue jeans, a lightweight black rocker shirt, and slipped his arms through a leather jacket with narrow lapels. Sitting on the bed, he slipped on his black combat boots. Once done, he grabbed his bag and headed for the door. They needed to leave early to arrive at his pack-in time. In one hand he had his duffel bag. In the other hand, he held his phone and started texting Abraham. He finished texting for them to get ready when he heard the door next to him open. Glancing up, he saw that Mary had also stepped out of her hotel room. Her eyes found him immediately. Last night's kiss appeared immediately. Neither of them spoke, but a blush appeared on Mary's cheeks. She broke eye contact first, and he was a little disappointed. Mary's confidence last night was unexpected but welcomed. He found her initiative to kiss strongly attractive. So, where are we going? Still not looking at him. Are you asking me or the floor? He looked down at the white casual shoes she had on. He had asked Abraham to have someone find her some clothes to wear. Her head shoots up. You, she answered with a displeased frown. He fought back a smile. We need to leave soon. It will take us several hours to reach home. Are you hungry? We can grab something in the lobby before we head out. Riker asked. She nodded, thinking if it was going to be several hours, she would like to eat something. That will be nice. They walked together to the elevator, silent to the lobby. When they stopped downstairs, we met Abraham and the rest of the enforcers. They were yawning with disheveled hair. Some of them looked like they rolled right out of bed and threw on whatever they could find that was clean. We'll have some breakfast before we leave, Riker informed them. The enforcers grumbled their answers. It sounded like pure mumbling. They all looked exhausted. Abraham scratched at his temple and yawned for the second time. I need coffee, or else I will not be good company. He walked straight to the dining area while the other enforcers followed. Mary smirked at the enforcers' reaction. They all came home late last night. Riker walked ahead with Mary following closely behind him. After breakfast, they all hopped into the jeep. Riker's pack hid in the high mountains on private land. Driving by vehicle, they can only reach the outskirt of the territory. They must run in wolf from the rest of the way home. Halfway to the midpoint, everyone has fallen asleep except for Mary and Riker. They remained in comfortable silence until Riker couldn't hold it in any longer. He turned to glance at Mary, who was looking out the window. Why did you leave? Breaking the quiet environment, she turned her head abruptly to look at him, before turning to look out the window in front of her. Sighing, she leaned back and crossed her arms over her chest protectively. The green shirt she has on was a little big on her but fits her comfortably. The color highlighted the brown coppers of her hair and eyes. I'm 25 and waiting for something to happen in my life. Marcus is sweet, loves me to death, but he can overbear. I just needed, she sighed and moved to smooth some hair behind her tiny little ear. I don't know what I am saying. You needed to do something for yourself. You needed to open your wings. Riker answered for her. She chuckled softly, the soft sound flowing quietly in the quiet vehicle. A snore came from behind them. Riker glanced behind to see Cole. One of his enforcers' head nestled on Abraham's shoulder. Funny how you say that when we are werewolves. I need to find myself, and I wish I could find it easily where I was at, but I couldn't. I think a part of me is begging to be found. Do you know what I mean? God, I must sound like an imbecile right now. No, Riker answered with a shake of his head, his eyes returning to the entry road. Believe it or not, but Riker knows exactly what she meant. He felt that way one time too. There was one time in his life where he wanted more than what it gave. Riker's hands tightened on the wheel. I know what you mean, Riker replied. You do? I do. He turned to look at her. Don't worry about it. I think you made the right decision. She laughed quietly and broke eye contact to look back onto the road. Do you think I would find what I am looking for at your pack? She didn't see it. But Riker smiled then. He hoped that she did. That whatever she was looking for was there. Maybe then she'll stay. It has been a long time since Riker met someone like her. People were satiated with what they had. They want nothing more or nothing less. There's nothing wrong with that at all. So, whatever she was looking for, whether if it was love or success, he hopes she finds it there. Can't see into the future. But I hope that you do, he replied honestly. At that response, Mary felt her heartstring tug. She changed the subject. What about you? What's your story? He smirked then. Do you mean to tell me you haven't looked me up? If only he knew what she had done. A blush appeared on her cheek and she laughed nervously. Yeah, right, she replied before clearing her throat. I mean, I heard stories about you, but there is very little and sometimes the information given is false. I rather hear it from you directly. He cast her a side glance before returning his focus onto the country road. The sun was setting in front of them and cast a warm shadow on the trees on the side of the road. The sun upon his sun-kissed skin, though, was a different story in Mary's opinion. He looked even more handsome right now. While waiting for an answer, Riker pondered over the many reasons he shouldn't talk about his life. But, with Mary, he couldn't resist. He could only conclude that he was comfortable with her to where he didn't mind talking about his life. It has been Abraham and me for a very long time, Riker replied, his mind flying back to the old days of just the two of them. How did you get to where you are right now? Mary asked. Riker could remember it like yesterday. He ran away when he was 16, left his brother alone to fend for himself. He thought he didn't need anybody else. Riker learned more than he could ever within that year he was on his own. He learned that the world was cruel and you can't be alone in a world like this. When he returned to Abraham, he was 18 and broken. He owed Abraham a lot. Abraham did everything he had to turn Riker around. Would you believe I told you I am lucky? Riker asked. Mary scrutinized him. A man like him. He was rough all around and she could seriously sense some walls, like he had somehow blocked the world from getting to him again. No, she replied. He ripped his eyes from the road to look at her for what seemed the 100th time. Both their eyes connected, and Mary knew she was right. Riker wasn't lucky. How would you know? He retorted. I don't know. But am I right? He nodded before looking at the road. I've learned that to survive this world, you shouldn't wait for luck. You should take life by the hands and fly with it, because only you can change the course of your fate. He answered her. The car came to a rolling stop in front of a small cabin. Vehicles parked in a gravel parking lot. The lights inside the cabin were off. The place was vacant. Riker pulled up to one vehicle and turned off the ignition. Everyone began rousing from their sleep and rubbing at their eyes. Riker stepped out of the jeep. Mary's eyes scanned the terrain. Thick masses of trees stretched for what looked like miles. The incline of the terrain to continue in an upward motion until it touched the sky. The sun had already almost settled over the horizon already. Very little light lit their way. Riker opened the door and handed her bag of clothes to her. Everyone else was getting ready to leave. We run in wolf forms the rest of the way. Do you think you can keep up? Riker asked. Mary knew why he asked. Alpha Solomon's pack was flat terrain compared to Riker's territory. She has never run up mountains like these before. But Mary was stubborn. She didn't admit it. She only nodded her head. I can do it, she replied. Riker didn't respond to her announcement. He only nodded his head that he heard her and continued into the woods with the rest of the males. Mary knew why he disappeared into the woods with them. They were going to shift. Clutching her bag to her chest, she walked a little farther away from them. When she found a private area but within earshot, she stripped, folded her clothes back into her bag, and shifted into her wolf. Shifting is a norm for werewolves who do not live in the cities. If you do it often, it becomes easier. When Mary shifted completely, she nipped her bag between her teeth and kicked her paws towards the group. They were waiting for her and seemed to tower almost over her form. Slowly, Riker's enforcers, Abraham, and Riker surrounded her, Riker staying ahead of them. Riker was the first to run. Mary followed and the rest of the enforcers continued to maintain a circle around her. Oddly, Mary has never felt safer than ever, and she was grateful for Riker's thoughtfulness. Running through the woods there was a unique feeling. Mary felt this when she ran to catch up to them that night. A sense of overwhelming freedom mixed with anxiety. It gave her a weird adrenaline that ran through her veins and pumped through her heart. She was finally here. 15 Mary's muscles were screaming for rest. The incline of the mountain was ridiculously high. She was running out of breath. Everyone around her seemed perfectly fine while she wanted to give up and fall to the ground. A quick glance around her and she noticed how much more muscular in forms their wolves are. They seemed to be exactly what a dominant predator should be while she looked no more like a puppy. Fluffy on second thought as her tongue wiped feverishly in front of her, she looked like a miserable puppy that was about to die of exhaustion. An inner battle grew inside her mind. A part of her wanted to push, to be a part of this pack, but another part of her was telling her to just give up and take a rest. Just when Mary was about to call quits, she noticed that everyone began slowing down to a trot. Relieved, she almost wept and whimpered her pain out loud. The sound of their paws treading through the drier air was as soft as the sound of the night. Quiet. Riker turned around to face Mary, and she was glad that she was in her wolf form. She must look a complete fright at this point. When they all stopped, her legs buckled, and she felt like a newborn puppy in front of everyone. Abraham was quick. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. He leaned his body up against her and pushed her back up to a standing position. Mary took a heavy inhale of air. Her lungs were aching. Her eyes were watery from the lack of air and exhaustion. The climate change up here differed completely from down there. A little denser because of the elevation, but clean. The smell of fresh pine trees entering her nostrils. Distracted, she wasn't looking at Riker until she heard the wind change with a whoosh. Looking his way out of curiosity, it startled her to find Riker without clothes and human. He stood in front of her in all his glory, like a Greek statue, without a single care in the world. Her knees buckled again, but for a different reason altogether. The gods and goddesses gifted the male in all kinds of ways. She heard someone snorting behind her and immediately realized she had been gawking at him. Snapping her eyes down, she pretended to eye the dirt with obvious interest. Waiting for him to get dressed, she kept her ears perked, listening to the rustle of clothes. She wondered why he had suddenly shifted. Were they close? Riker appeared in front of her, and she made sure not to look until she saw combat boots. Her eyes trailed up the body until a pair of muffled eyes met hers. We are close to our pack town now. You can shift if you would like, or you can run in wolf form. Mary glanced behind her to one enforcer who kindly had taken her bag after she struggled to hold it in her mouth many miles back. He handed her bag to her. She took it between her teeth and patted over to a high bush that would hide her body from everyone. When she shifted back to her human self, she changed into old clothes, a green t-shirt, skinny jeans, and white casual shoes. Not wanting them to wait too long for her, she was in a hurry. Grabbing her bag, she ran around the bush and smacking straight into Riker's hard chest. He caught her before she could fall. He had also changed into his old clothes but decided against wearing his leather jacket. She was a little disappointed. She rather liked the leather jacket. Glancing around her quickly, she noticed that everyone had left them. Did I take too long? She questioned guiltily. No, they are eager to get home. Riker explained. Relieved, she asked Christian, knowing that everyone must be asleep. She wanted to know where she will stay. Is there a place for me to stay? He nodded. I had Abraham call ahead and had someone clean a small cabin for you. You'll be living close to my house, but will have your own privacy. Should she be disappointed that she would not stay in the same house as him? To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Milburn, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. But she was more excited about the cabin. She loved living on her own. That's great, she replied. I'll walk you to it. It's several miles south. But if we run, we will make it in just a few minutes. Horror filled Mary, her hair strewn all over the place from exhaustion. She must have bags underneath her eyes from the lack of sleep. The traveling has been tiring. Now she has to run. Mary wanted to cry. Riker must have seen the emotional roller coaster she was going through internally because he bent down and swept her up into his arms. She released her bag to wrap her arms around his neck on instinct. I can run, she argued. He didn't look at her but started his pace. Running up the mountain, is it easy? You surprised everyone here. They thought they would have to carry you when we were a quarter of the way in. Riker admitted. It appalled Mary. They had no faith in her. She was glad she didn't give up and proved him wrong. You did great, Mary, but I think I can take it from here, he replied. She should argue and be totally against it. But her muscles were crying for rest. She was weaker than a newborn pup. No point in arguing with him. She accepted his help and rested her head against his shoulder. Riker's pace picked up when he felt her give in. Their faith in me is unacceptable. I'm not weak, she muttered bitterly. He didn't respond, but held her tighter against his body. What I said back there wasn't to offend you. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Milburn, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Living in my pack, they will question your strength. We are not like others. We train our females and work hard in providing a good living for our kind. Running these woods should be easy if you train hard enough. But for those who try to make it to where we are, it is almost impossible because of our terrain. When you pushed through and made it without help, you have earned admiration from my enforcers, Riker explained. Admiration? She frowned. I thought we were getting along. I consider them as friends already. They think the same of you, but now they admire your strength. You just show them you are not weak and will survive in the pack, he clarified. Oddly enough, that made Mary happy. They weren't calling her weak. They were testing her to see if she would fit, and they approved. I have to warn you though, I have many pack members. By tomorrow, everyone will hear of your arrival. Some may welcome your presence, but others are a little harder to please. I'm not here to please anyone, Mary argued. Riker was running so fast. She could feel the wind whipping against her hair. It was practically putting the ends of her hair into her mouth. She constantly had to smooth them back. Finally, she had no more patience. She kept her hand there to keep her hair from whipping against her face. You need not please anyone, but you need to find a place within my pack, he argued back. She realized what he said held some truth. Was his pack really that wary against strangers? They couldn't be bad, could they? Riker slowed down. She turned her head to look ahead of them and found a little small cabin. It had a small wooden door and a few small windows. Nothing too big and could probably house only one person, but it was comfy enough for her. Stopping in front of the cabin, he allowed her feet to touch the ground. This is where you will stay. And then he pointed to his left. Beyond that valley is my home. If you need anything, swing by. I am usually not home in the morning, but in the evenings I will be. She nodded her head and followed him as he walked up to her house. On the doorknob was a key. They had left the key on the doorknob. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Milburn, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Mary thought that was the weirdest thing ever, but then she realized it made sense since the only living beings up here were his pack members. The trust and loyalty were there. He twisted the key and opened the door before allowing her to go inside. It's fully stocked. I had asked the pack members to get every ingredient that they can find. Still standing outside but leaning inside to flip the switch next to the door, it lit the entire cabin, spinning around. Mary's eyes took in the small little cabin. It was a dainty little cabin, small little sofa and couches and a kitchen small enough to fit a few guests. Her eyes wandered down the dimmed hallway and figured that was where the bathroom and bedroom. To my agent extraordinaire, Mate, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. But most of the pack members who are unmated lives alone. We allow the ones that are mated to build bigger homes for family, he explained. It's perfect, she replied, immediately turning to look at him again. For a moment, they stood there staring at each other, the sound of the night buzzing in the background. I'll check in on you tomorrow before I leave on duty. Have a good sleep. To my agent extraordinaire, Mate, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. He ended their night together with an almost lopsided smile. Good night, she whispered and watched him walk towards the valley. Once he was away, she closed the door and locked it before walking around the little cabin. If she had thought the kitchen was small, the bathroom was smaller. She need only take 2 steps from the door and she's by the shower already. The toilet and bathroom sink were to her right. She walked to the last room in the house and turned on the light switch by the door. The light illuminated the bedroom. A cherrywood canopy queen-sized bed leaned against the opposite wall. There was a cherrywood dresser and nightstand that complemented the bed frame, and a small Easter rug in the middle of the floor. Maroon curtains hung on the windows. Sighing, she called today's event a night. She threw her bag onto the ground and crawled into bed, and carrying that she probably stunk like a skunk. Her legs were thanking her quietly as she removed her weight from them. She fell into a deep abyss of sleep immediately with no trouble. 16. Upon waking, Mary burrowed herself further into the warm, comfortable quilted sheets. After a restful sleep, she felt rejuvenated and well, rested, but still she fought the thought of waking up. One more minute of peaceful rest before she wakes. Seconds ticked by inside her head, but sleep had already left her. It was already too late, and she knew she needed to get up. Sighing, her eyes flew open to bright light. She squinted and rubbed the remainders of sleep from her eyes. Glancing at the window to her right, she noticed that the glowing light stretched across the blue skies. By the shadows on the trees, it looks about midday. So soon, Mary groaned. She was extremely tired from yesterday. Stretching her limbs revealed how tired she was. Her muscles throbbed. Mary turned her head to the side and caught a whiff of her body scent. The smell on her body was repulsing. She needed a shower immediately. Crawling out of bed, she walked out of her bedroom and across the hall to the bathroom. Mary took a long warm shower until her muscles stopped aching. Once done, she grabbed the towel hanging on the towel bar. She dried herself quickly before wrapping it around her midsection. After dressing in a long, oversized shirt and some baggy grey lounge pants, Mary walked out into the living room, pulling back the maroon curtains on the living room window. She looked outside. She remembered what Riker said last night. He'll swing by in the morning. But it was midday already. Had she missed his visit? Turning away from the window, she walked to the kitchen and began making herself some blueberry banana pancakes and scrambled eggs. Noticing that they stocked her kitchen with fresh ingredients and enough dry ingredients, she was quite thankful by the time she ate her breakfast. To my agent extraordinaire, Mate, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. She cleaned her dishes properly. One of her pet peeves was a dirty kitchen. Cooking was her passion, and cooking excellent dishes need to start with a clean kitchen. While washing her dishes, though, she saw movement outside her sink window. Looking up, she noticed Abraham walking towards her cabin with one enforcer that traveled with them. His name was Gray. Gray looked to be around Abraham and Riker's age. He was a little slimmer in muscular form than the 2 brothers, but he was just as handsome as the 2. The only minor flaw in him was the deep scar on his cheek, but the startling blue, grayish eyes took attention away from his scar. Gray's hair was long, but she noticed he liked to tie it up into a messy bun. Usually, males with long hair should look feminine in all kinds of ways. However, the word feminine wasn't a word Mary would describe Grey. The two didn't seem to notice her in the window yet, but it looks like they were heading her way. Mary finished washing the rest of her dishes before drying her hands on the hand towel. Two sharp knocks sounded at her front door. Mary opened the door and greeted with smiles. They both also looked like they slept well. "Hello," she greeted them. "Good afternoon, Mary," Gary replied and then took a sniff, his eyes lighting up at the smell of pancakes and scrambled eggs. Mary glanced inside her home, even though she knew why Gary was looking inside her home already. With a wide grin, she opened her door wider. "Come inside. I just cooked breakfast and lucky for you too. I cooked more than I can eat." "No, we're good. We just ate Leona's lunch," Gary weakly protested. But, I mean, it would be rude of us to say no to you." Abraham nodded quickly. They were looking at it eagerly and agreeing. Mary fought back a smile, closed the door behind them, and walked to the kitchen. She quickly made them a plate and set it in front of them. One thing about a cook or chef, they love sharing their food and seeing the look of satisfaction cross their customers' faces. "So, what are you two doing here?" she asked while leaning against the counter with her arms crossed. Gary took a large bite out of his pancake before stuffing his face with the scrambled eggs. She added a bit more pancakes to his dish. Mary remembered that he quite liked pancakes when she made them at Alpha Solomon's house. "Riker is busy with pack matters and asked us to give you the grand tour around the territory," Abraham replied. Should she feel disheartened? A little deflated at her not getting to see him. Her affection for the Alpha was becoming a problem. As an independent female, she should know better than to fall for someone like him. He was beyond her reach. Yet, the brief twinge of pain in her chest apparent and throbbing. "But he may stop by later to see you," Gary blurted when he saw the flash of disappointment appear on her face. Her quick crestfallen facial reaction irritated her. She let down her guard and they were able to catch that little emotion from her. She tried to brush it off and turned away from the two males. Walking to the fridge, she pulled out the orange juice she had freshly squeezed earlier. Pouring each male a cup of the juice, she walked back to them and placed the cups in front of them. "So where will you be taking me?" She changed the subject. "I figured you'd like to check out our little town. Get a few things that you may need to make this place a little more like home." Abraham answered her. They finished their food, and the three walked outside. Mary turned around to lock the door behind her before turning to look at the two. "Is it far from here?" "The town is several miles east from here," Gary responded. "Are we running or are we walking?" Mary couldn't resist asking. Both males wore smirks on their faces, knowing full well that Mary would not run at all. Not any time soon anyway. However, the two males were happy to see that Mary was catching on to their living style and didn't mention cars as an option. "They do not have any vehicles up here. The nearest place for vehicles was down the mountain where they had packed their vehicle last night. It kept the air up here clean, and growing crops was a lot easier with less pollution." "Walking," Gary replied, still smiling at her. They walked for several miles east down a cleared path. Meanwhile, talking intermittently between each other and admiring nature. "I got to say, these trees are as tall as its inhabitants. Over on Alpha Solomon's land, we rarely see trees as these trees around us." Mary gestured to the overgrown and over 100-year-old tree. "We are lucky to live up here." Abraham agreed with a nod. "Tell me about your pack members." "What do you want to know?" Gary was the first to respond. "What are they like?" "Last night, your Alpha told me a little bit, but the bit that he told me makes me nervous." She chuckled nervously, tucking the loose strand of hair behind her ear. She didn't even bother changing and realized she should have because she was going to meet new people. But it was a little too late. "They are normal-looking pack members," Gary said. Mary burst out laughing. "Well, I sure hope so. I've imagined you have done research on our pack." Abraham asked a little more seriously than Gary's response. Mary nodded her head. She searched about the two brothers and found a lot of information, but nothing too detailed about their lives. Then you should already know that my brother wasn't born alpha blood. They granted him the title after he gained many pack members. These pack members are estranged werewolves who had no other place to go. Many of them were abandoned and left for dead. Abraham continued. She recalled reading something like that. It caused huge controversy among werewolf politics because many of these werewolves were ones that have committed crimes and were out of packs to live on their own. Yet, Waika brought them all together, and from a powerful pack. Finally, they arrived at the first clearing. Mary could see any small shops and buildings. It was a small little town. Both Gary and Abraham walked her through the town first before they began shopping. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Waika made sure that Abraham carried some cash on him if Mary wanted something. Although she accepted the money, she promised to pay them back. When they were done shopping for some necessities she needed, they were exhausted and hungry, on their way to grab some food. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. They noticed a local farmer's market. Mary couldn't resist. She needed to see the place. How Mary saw it. The more she knew, the more she can do without help. Many pack members stopped to stare, but nobody walked up to them to greet her. Many of them were just observing her from afar. Mary halted at one canopy tent. An elderly pack member stood behind a large table filled with vegetables. Mary moved closer to examine the products. The first thing she noticed was that they were vibrant in colors. Wow, these are beautiful. She picked up a red bell pepper to examine. Thank you, ma'am, the elderly male replied with a kind smile. Mary smiled back at him. Gary and Abraham stood nearby but paid no attention to the exchange. Her eyes caught sight of some rich green color asparagus. Picking up a batch, she looked it over. These asparagus are not too thin as not too thick. They are perfect for grilling, Mary murmured to herself. But the elderly male replied anyway to her comment. Definitely good for grilling. My mate loves to grill and bake them, he said with a grin. Mary noticed he was missing a tooth or two and found him very adorable. You seem like a female who knows her ingredients well. What's your name? To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I am new here, she replied. But that fact was obvious already to everyone here. Nobody is a stranger in this pack. My name is Louise. My wife's name is Doris. We own a farm just north of the Alpha's home. Louise replied. Well, Louise, I love your vegetables. If you live close to the Alpha's home, I may just swing by your place instead of the market to shop for my groceries. You know, anything to minimize my walk time. Louise chortled at Mary's response because he knew that the mountain terrain wasn't a simple walk in the park. Plus, he was happy that Mary loved his vegetables enough to go to his farm. To win a customer's satisfaction was the greatest thing ever. Even if it's a stranger, my mate and I would love for you to swing by. Mary bought most of his vegetables. It made Louise so happy that he handed her some of his farmed eggs for free. No, I can't, she declined. Come on, take it. Take it as a new home gift from me, Louise argued. She smiled gently at the elderly male. Thank you. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. The trio continued on to the original destination, stopping at a local bar. They ordered their food. While eating, though, the three got into a huge debate about humans, daily activities that they bet until they were all buzzed from the tonic drinks. By the end of the night, the three were regretting staying too long and drinking too much, even in a buzzed state. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. They were all able to stumble their way back home. It took a little longer because Mary insisted they took the wrong turn, but eventually they made it back to her house. In the night, far later than they expected to return see. I told you we needed to take a right. Mary argued. You said right. But we took a left. Abraham shot back. Shh, don't tell her. We were supposed to keep it a secret, Gary said before laughing. Mary made a face. She was trying to think back to the time where they decided, but the memory seemed to have disappeared. I was sure we took a left, she mumbled while walking towards the cabin. The three walked to the cabin until they noticed that something was blocking the doorway. All three of them looked up together and came face to face with Riker, who remained quiet throughout their exchange. He didn't look angry, nor did he look impressed with how they all looked. 17. Riker had an arduous day, investing his time in resolving internal pack issues for Nazis, waterworks, electricity, approval to build, and so on. Matters he had pushed aside for several days. He didn't realize how much he had to follow back on until it was nearly dark. When he finally could break away from everyone, he was more than relieved and a little eager. He had been thinking about Mary all day, and every time he thought about her, he mentally scolded himself for it. Who the hell cares if she was comfortable at her cabin? Why did he need to make sure she received clean sheets? Why was it his concern that Abraham and Gary follow her around today, making sure she was comfortable with his pack members? Then he told himself it was his duty. Even thinking about that excuse made him want to beat himself up. Duty? Since when did he give two fucks about duty? At the end of the day, though, Riker walked past her cabin. When he saw the lights in her home were not on and it looked empty, he stopped to knock on her door. There was no sound on the other side. Now, his mind was flying with a million questions. He had specifically told Abe and Gary to give her a tour around the area and bring her back. How the hell was it taking them this long? Then his mind wandered to other things. Did they run into trouble? Was the pack giving them a hard time? Shoving his hand into his pocket, he pulled out his cell phone and dialed Abe's number. But there was no answer. Left with no choice, Riker waited for their return. An hour went by before he heard talking in the distance. From the animate conversation, it was obviously the three of them he heard, his head lifting to look in the direction he was hearing them from. They looked amicable together. None of them noticed him until they stood before him. It didn't take long before Gary left. They dropped Mary's shopping bags on the kitchen counter before they left. Now it was just Mary and Riker. Pink tinted her cheeks. Her eyes were glassy from fatigue and judging from the alcoholic smell that mixed with her scent. She was a little buzzed, or drunk. I understand that drinking on my first day here is not a good impression. I should have known better and just gone out to do what I set out to do. But I didn't realize how quickly these drinks up in these necks of woods can be. I don't know what you guys put in there, but it is delicious, she rambled. Riker watched her sway on her feet while talking. I told myself one drink. You see, I just remembered. I met a kind elderly male. He is a sweet male. Gave me some eggs. His name is Louis. Do you know him? To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing enthusiasm. Riker knew him. Louis and Doris were a sweet couple who settled in his pack for many years now. The two were wandering rogues that found each other before they came here. They have a son who was about Mary's age. Mary continued to ramble and waving her hand. Turning on her feet, she was walking in a zigzag manner to the living room sofa. Topping down, she sighed, leaned her head back, and closed her eyes. Lord, I will need to get used to all this walking. I am exhausted and out of shape, she grumbled and then fell silent with her eyes closed. For a few minutes, he thought she had fallen asleep, but then she shoots up from leaning against the sofa and looked at him. There is something I need to tell you, she blurted, standing up. Mary walked to stand in front of him. Riker couldn't resist the attraction. Oddly enough, she looked adorable. Talks a little much, but adorable. Taking a deep breath, she slowed her words so quickly that he didn't catch what she said. I wanted to kiss your brother, not you, she explained. What? He said immediately afterward. She sighed heavily and cupped his face with her hands, guilt-eating her up like she was nothing at all. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Drunk smile appeared on her face while she continued to caress him. Riker would not lie. Her touch set his body on fire. At the ball. I thought you were your brother, she grumbled. Understandable. Many people always get them mixed up. I thought you were your brother. That was why I kissed you, she said a little slower. Hot coils of jealousy burned through his veins. Even anger. He was upset. You wanted to kiss my brother, and you ended up kissing me, he repeated angrily. Riker didn't know what to say. He had just overheard that she didn't mean to kiss him. She had wanted to kiss Abraham. Jealousy riled up inside of Riker. It filled him so quickly that his temper spiked. He took 2 steps and stood in front of her, grabbing onto the back of her neck swiftly. He pulled her drunk body close. Mary gasped as soon as he pulled her close, fear establishing inside of her, but also lust. He looked like a dangerous devil about to crush the very life inside of her. But the fire in his eyes, they were entrancing. Did he just hear her correctly? Many females have vied for his attention. What game was she trying to play? His brother and he may look a lot alike, but to be used in this kind of way, to be mistaken for his brother, good God. Riker was extremely pissed and embarrassed. I can explain. She started immediately. I didn't mean to kiss you. Truly. I wanted to kiss your brother because I saw him at the ball. He was cute and sweet. We exchanged a few words and he... Don't speak another word, he said through clenched teeth, his fingers digging into the back of her neck. She whimpered softly from pain. Or was it from the growing ache between her legs? Please. Don't kill me, she pleaded. The anger in his eyes was astonishing. The calm ambience from early disappeared. Riker looked ready to tear her apart, which was why she quickly spat out a plea for her life. His anger simmered a notch, and he sputtered a word. What? Her frantic eyes found his again. She had her hands on his chest to stop him from coming in any closer, but those dainty hands burned holes through the lapels of his suit to his skin. I wanted to kiss your brother. I thought I saw him slip into the room you were in. It was dark. I didn't think. And I kissed you. She murmured slowly and lowered her eyelashes shamefully. I didn't mean to. But what? He asked before coughing and releasing her. He walked away because he wasn't sure if he wanted to kiss her or strangle her for her mistake. The thought of her kissing Abraham grinds his anger. But the thought he wasn't her first choice made him even angrier. Mary rubbed the ache from her neck and moved to follow him. He was moving away from her, retracting and pulling away, and oddly, Mary didn't want that. You wanted to kiss my brother. He couldn't even say the sentence without feeling rage crawling to the surface. He began pacing. The territorial instinct in him wanted to seek his competition and kill. One way to only claim what he believes was his. I did it first, she drawled from behind him, while he spun around to glare at her. Well, you're an alpha, Mary suddenly snapped, throwing her hands up as if the answer was an obvious answer. What the fuck does a title got to do with anything? He moved closer to her. Mary sighed once again, while swaying on her feet. I'm tired and not thinking things through. I'm going to bed, she announced. As soon as she walked up to him, Riker swept her up into his arms. On instinct, Mary wrapped her arms around his neck just like the first night he carried her to the cabin. Feeling a little comfortable, and the need to soothe Riker's anger came to her naturally. She touched one side of his cheek to gain his attention. Please don't be angry with me. I just thought because you are an alpha, you will never go for someone like me. You are way out of my league. I feel like a piece of dust in your presence. That was why I had kissed Abraham. At least then. I may still have a chance. Those pretty little hazel eyes of his softened a little. You are not out of my league. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Renanda, you are beautiful, Riker replied gently. She shook her head. No, you don't have to lie. I know that I am not beautiful. Riker opened her bedroom door and entered the room. Walking to the bed, he gently laid her down before removing her shoes. I can do it. She shoots up from the bed. I got it. Riker shoved her hands away. I am not lying. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nelbert. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Why do you think I kissed you back? He looked up to see she was twiddling her fingers nervously. Because I kissed you. You have no choice. You are a very kind male. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nelbert. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. You helped me so much. I can never thank you enough. When you kissed me back. She paused. I didn't kiss you. I kissed you because I wanted to. He argued. Mary looked up at him with glazed, drunk and tired eyes. Oh, she replied. Riker moved to sit on the edge of the bed next to her. Lifting one of his hands, he cupped one side of her face before looking at her in the eyes. I kissed you because I desire you, he murmured huskily. His hand moved to the back of her neck and pulled her into a deep kiss. If her intention was to kiss his brother, Riker swore that he would do everything he can to make her forget that. Also, he snuck a little punishment into the kiss. The kiss was instantly feverish. He slid his tongue across the seam of her lips to which she gladly opens an allowance. Riker can taste the sweet tonic in her mouth. He threaded his fingers through her hair and deepened the kiss, thrusting his tongue inside and sliding it across hers. Distantly, Riker heard Maro moan, her hands moving up to cling onto his arms for support. When he pulled back, Mary sighed with a lazy smile on her face. One more, she pleaded. Riker was immediately pleased. She wanted more from him. Her response was for him, but he knew not to proceed further. Mary needed to sleep, but he promised himself silently that tomorrow he will take her around. Maybe having her around his brother wasn't such a good idea after all. Leaning forward, he brushed his lips over her swollen lips. It's time for bed. I will see you tomorrow. Mary. He breathed against her lips before tucking her and leaving her.